On December 7th, 1941, something crazy happened. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, but during this, one of the Japanese fighter pilots got damaged and crash landed on Niihau, which is a small island in Hawaii. The people living there had no idea that the United States was at war with Japan, and what followed was confusion and violence, all packed into a few tense days that would later have a huge impact and be a reason for the internment camps for Japanese Americans. This is the Niihau incident. So on the morning of December 7th, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Hundreds of planes were involved, and one of these pilots was Shigenori Nishikaichi. His plane was hit during the attack, and so he could not make it back to his aircraft carrier. Japanese planners had agreed beforehand that damaged pilots could land on Niihau and wait for rescue by submarine. However, what they did not account for was that Niihau wasn't exactly empty. It had people, and this is what would set the stage for the events to come. Now, Niihau was unlike the rest of Hawaii. It had no electricity and no phones, and the small population who did live there lived a rather traditional lifestyle. They did have a radio and newspapers, and so they did know that relations with Japan weren't great, but they were definitely not aware of the attack at Pearl Harbor. And so, to them, this plane crash was strange but not threatening. When Nishikaichi crashed, a man named Howard Kaleohano saw the crash and went over quickly. When he went over, he noticed the gun and documents and quickly grabbed these before Nishikaichi could react. Now, Howard was aware that relations with Japan were not great, but still gave him food and treated him like a guest. There was no hostility yet. However, he spoke little English, and communication was difficult, and so they decided to get Ishimatsu Shintani, who was a Japanese man married to a Hawaiian, in order to translate. However, after just a couple of words, he just randomly departed without saying anything. But it would not be the last time we saw of Shintani. But because of this, the villagers would send for Yoshio and Irene Harada to translate. And it is these two who would play a big role in the ensuing incident. See, everything changed that night when the islanders heard news from the outside world. A radio broadcast revealed that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. The pilot that they had been hosting was now clearly an enemy soldier. Now this made the islanders very nervous, and so they had Yoshio and Irene Harada translate to Nishikaichi what they had heard about Pearl Harbor. Now, knowing that the islanders knew of the Japanese attack, Nishikaichi thought deeply about what he should do and decided he needed to get back his documents and get off this island immediately. The villagers were pondering what they should do with him and decided that they would wait for the owner of the island, Almer Robinson, to come back to decide. However, what they didn't know is that there was a full military blockade banning travel around the islands from the US military due to the war. The islanders didn't know this, and so for the meantime, it was decided that Nishikaichi could stay with Yoshio and Irene. However, the village decided to set up a number of guards outside their house just in case. Now, a couple days would pass, and on 12th of December, the climax of the story begins. So the Haradas began contacting Shintani, asking him to try and get Nishikaichi's documents, and so Shintani tried to do that. He went to Kaleohano, who they suspect had the documents, and tried to bribe him with $200. This did not work, and so Shintani blurted out that he was forced to do this and ran off to the forest. Yoshio, Irene and Nishikaichi then decided to try to escape. They first overpowered the guard outside their home and then managed to arm themselves with two guns, a shotgun and Nishikaichi's pistol that the Hawaiians had confiscated. They then tried to find Kaleo Hano, who had Nishikaichi's documents, and so they went to his house. And it was here that Kaleo Hano saw them approaching from his outhouse and decided to make a run for it. Nishikaichi saw him and fired a few bullets with none hitting him. At this point, Nishikaichi knew he had to act fast. He first decided to go back to his plane and use the radio to try and contact any Japanese nearby to get him. However, he got no reply. He then took one of the guns off the plane and set fire to it to burn the evidence. Nishikaichi would then go to Kaleo Hano's house and also set fire to it, thinking that the documents might be there. However, the documents had already left with Kaleo Hano. Now, it is here that the story gets interesting. See, Nishikaichi decided to take a few people hostage, including Ben Kanehile and Ella Kanehile. They ordered that Ben go and look for Kaleo Hano, the person they think had the documents. And so Ben went. However, he already knew that Kaleo Hano had already escaped, and so he pretended to look for him and call out his name. Eventually, Nishikaichi started to get more and more frustrated, to the point where it is said he threatened to kill everyone if Kaleo Hano was not found. Once Ben Kanehile returned, he and his wife knew they had to take action before Nishikaichi got more ecstatic. So, once the opportunity came, both Ben and Ella struck Nishikaichi, trying to bring him down. Nishikaichi replied by shooting Ben 3 times, but Ben still managed to lift Nishikaichi and slam him into a wall, while Ella came and smashed his head with a rock. Ben then took out his knife and slit Nishikaichi's throat. Yoshio Harada was watching all of this happening, and perhaps out of guilt he turned his gun on himself and pulled the trigger, ending the chaos on the island. The next afternoon, the US authorities arrived and investigated what had happened. They took Irene and Ishimatsu Shintani into custody, and news of what had happened here quickly spread through America, and due to this event, people became cautious about their fellow Japanese American, and so this event was cited as a reason that America decided to create the internment camps for the Japanese American population out of fear that they might also turn like the Haradas did in Niihau. And so while this Niihau incident was a small incident on a small island, it had massive consequences for the rest of America. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, then please subscribe for more stories like this, and I'll see you next time.